Chapter 30, Part 2 of J.S. Bach, Volume 2. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. J.S. Bach, Volume 2 by Albert Schweitzer, translated by Ernest Newman. The Coffee Cantata, Schweigt stille, plaudert nicht, is much more unassuming. It aims only at refreshment. In 1727, Picander had published, in the first volume of his poems, a story in which he had made merry over the increasing passion for coffee. The King of France, he says, has forbidden the beverage in Paris, which occasions general lamentation. The women die as if the plague were raging. This went on until the interdict was removed. It should be mentioned that the praise of coffee had been warmly sung in a collection of cantatas published in Paris about 1703. The text of the first German coffee cantata was by Gottfried Krause, 1716. We do not know who wrote the music to it. Note: See Spitta, 2, 641 and forward. It is well known that in the 18th century many princes expressly forbade the public or secret drinking of coffee in their dominions. The Landgrave Friedrich of Hesse issued an ordinance of this kind in 1766. It was in force more than 20 years. The coffee smellers, Kaffeeriecher, who lodged information, received 1/4 of the fine. See the Frankfurter Zeitung for 26 July 1907. The theme of Picander's poem is as follows. Father Schlendrian, routine, wishes to break his daughter Lieschen of the coffee habit. "Oh, father, be not so strict," she pleads. "If I do not drink my little cup of coffee 3 times a day, I shall be like a dried-up piece of roast goat's flesh." Her prayer is reinforced by a roguish aria in praise of the black beverage. All threats are in vain. She will give up her promenades, her wide and fashionable whalebone skirt, even the silver-work ribbon for her cap. Not until she is engaged to a man will she consent to give up coffee. "So do it to-day, dear father," she says coaxingly in an aria. He has hardly gone out when Lieschen makes it known that "no wooer need come to the house unless he will promise, and have it put in the marriage settlement, that I may have liberty to make coffee when I will." To this libretto, Bach has written music that seems to come from Offenbach rather than from the old cantor of St. Thomas's. The work, as it stands, could be given as a one-act operetta. On Tuesday, the 7th April, 1739, a foreign musician, Fremder Musikus, announced a concert in the Frankfurt market-house, "in which, among other things, Herr Schlendrian and his daughter Lieschen will appear." This can only refer to Picander's poem. We do not know whether it was given with Bach's music, or whether the Fremder Musikus had set it himself. If the former, then this is the only case which we can positively cite of a performance of one of his works in another town. The soprano cantata, Von der Vergnügsamkeit, also probably dates from the early 30s. It seems to have been written for Anna Magdalena, and was probably performed in the domestic concerts that Bach used to have as long as his elder sons were with him. It is not of great musical value. It is significant that he should have been attracted by such a text. At first sight it merely seems to be concerned with the praise of a certain homely contentment, and the art of putting away from us unnecessary cares and desires. But the religious note imperceptibly creeps in. The true contentment is peace and quietness in God. Thus the work that began in such banality ends with the praise of divine sufficiency that makes the poor rich and on the level of princes. This was the spiritual state of the great German mystic, Bach, whose outward semblance was that of a comfortable citizen of the 18th century. Yet even he strove after vain things. In 1733 he went to Dresden to receive the title of court composer. It is not surprising to hear that while waiting for this he performed some patriotic cantatas in order to bring himself before the friendly notice of the royal house. On 27th of July he presented his petition. On 5th September he conducted in the Telemann Society a drama per musica, Hercules auf dem Scheidewege, to celebrate the 11th birthday of the Electoral Prince. We learn this from Picander's poems, among which the libretto is printed. The autograph score merely has the title of, quote, Glückwünschungskantate auf einen sächsischen Prinzen, congratulatory cantata for a Saxon prince, end quote. The subject is a familiar one. Pleasure and virtue each try to capture Hercules, who here represents the young prince. Warned by the faithful Echo, he resists the former, and falls into the arms of virtue, whereupon the work ends with the chorus, quote, Lust der Völker, Lust der deinen Blühe, holder Friedrich. As the summer meetings of the Collegium Musicum were held in Zimmermann's garden before the city gate, we may assume that this cantata was given in the open air, as was the case indeed with most of the large secular works he wrote in Leipzig. The music Bach has written to Picander's poem is, with all its charm and urbanity, full of characterization. As Spitta says, Handel's Val des Herakles is much inferior to that of Bach. It is not clear, however, what Spitta means by the reproach that the work is spoiled by an excess of sentiment that does not suit either the subject or the genre. He is always inclined, indeed, to underappreciate Bach's secular cantatas. Although the Val des Hercules is rarely performed in our concert halls, it is well known, for all that, for the principal numbers, 6 in all, have been incorporated in the Christmas oratorio at which Bach was working at that time. The opening chorus, Last und Sorgen, is identical with the chorus, Fallt mit Danken, of the Christmas oratorio. The slumber song that Pleasure sings over Hercules became the lullaby for the infant Jesus. This is the well-known aria. The text of the original and that of the adaptation may be cited here for the purpose of comparison. The choice of Hercules, quote, Pleasure. Schlafe, mein Lieber, und pflege der Ruhe. Folge der Lockung entbrannter Gedanken, schmecke die Lust der lüsternen Brust und erkenne keine Schranken. End quote. The Christmas oratorio, quote, Schlafe, mein Liebster, genieße der Ruhe, wache nach diesem für alle Gedeihen, labe die Brust, empfinde die Lust, wo wir unser Herz erfreuen. End quote. The aria, Flust mein Heiland, in the oratorio is also taken from Die Val des Hercules, where in the aria Troia's Echo, the hero asks the echo to reply to him. Here the musical effect is justified by the text. In the corresponding number of the Christmas oratorio, however, the echo effect is meaningless, the text having nothing to do with question and answer. The aria, Auf meinen Flügeln sollst du schweben, corresponds to the aria Ich will nur dir zu Ehren leben in the Christmas oratorio. Here again the music betrays how much of it is original and how much borrowed. In the aria and the cantata the motion of the floating wings is suggested. We seem to see an eagle soaring aloft with a few beats of his wings and then circling tranquilly in the air. The text of the aria in the oratorio has no relation whatever to this wonderfully plastic theme. Why did not Bach take the trouble to ensure by a corresponding pictorial figure community between the words and the music in the new text? So again with the aria Bereite dich Zion and its secular model Ich will dich nicht hören, the theme of the middle section has meaning only in relation to the original. At one point the solo violin is silenced and a curious figure enters in the basses. What does this signify? It is the familiar motif by means of which Bach represents the winding motion of a serpent or a dragon. The text, in fact, speaks of the serpents that approached the youthful Hercules, quote, the serpents that tried to cajole me, unquote. In the Christmas oratorio, the bass figure has no justification. The dialogue between Hercules and Virtue, Ich bin deine, also loses its musical meaning when it becomes the duet Herr, dein Mitleid in the oratorio. No one, acquainted with Bach's thematic invention, can doubt that both the motifs of the aria express joy of the liveliest kind. In the original, these themes are prompted by the text. Hercules' choice of virtue is expressed in a sort of nuptial rapture. Quote, Ich bin deine, du bist meine, ich küsse dich, küsse mich. End quote. The text of the adaptation, however, is quite colorless, and would never have given rise of itself to music of this kind. These examples of adaptations in a single work are typical for Bach. It is almost incredible that the same artist who insisted so strongly on characteristic expression in music could at another time constrain his music so barbarously to fit an alien text. Quote, We can congratulate ourselves, says Schweitzer, that with the exception of the final chorus and the recitatives, the whole of Die Wahl des Hercules has been incorporated in the Christmas oratorio written a year later. End quote. To this we may rejoin that our good luck is somewhat doubtful, since the adapted movements make a notably uncomfortable impression upon us. Even the hearer who does not exactly know how the adaptations have been made will feel that the words and music do not agree. This makes full artistic enjoyment impossible. Schweitzer is secretly rejoiced at these superficial transcriptions, as they confirm for him his pet conclusion that the pictorial and the characteristic are only accidental, not essential elements of Bach's art. The musician who is indifferent to all these theories will rather regret that the incorporation of Die Wahl des Hercules in the Christmas oratorio prevents us hearing it in its original form. On 8th December 1733, barely 3 months after Die Wahl des Hercules, Bach performed a new cantata in honor of the royal house, entitled Tönet, ihr Pauken, erschallet Trompeten, Drama der Musiker der Königin zu Ehren. Bach did not finish the work until the evening before the performance, as is shown by the note at the end of the autograph score. Fine, DSG 1, 1733, 7th December. It is interesting to observe that the majority of the cantatas in honor of the royal house, including Die Wahl des Hercules, bear the inscriptions JJ, Jesu Juva, Jesus Help, and SDG 1, Soli Deo Gloria, to God alone the glory. The text must be by Bach himself, since no author's name is given in the program book printed by Breitkopf. The quality and quantity of the dialect in the text, however, would be enough to betray the real author. The first chorus may be quoted as an example of Bach's poetry. Quote, Tönet, ihr Pauken, erschallet Trompeten, klingende Saiten erfüllet die Luft. Singet itzt Lieder, ihr muntren Poeten. Königin lebe, wie fröhlichst geruft. Königin lebe, dies wünsche der Sachse. Königin lebe und blühe und wachse. End quote. The finest numbers of this work also have passed into the Christmas oratorio. Here, however, the adaptations led to no violence being done to the music, both texts being of a general order and expressing the same joyous feelings. In January 1734, for the coronation of August II at Krakow, the zufriedengestellte Aeolus was arranged for a new text, Blasst Lärmen ihr Feinde. Footnote. Tönet ihr Pauken, to the Christmas oratorio. 1. Chorus, Tönet ihr Pauken. 2. Jauchzet, frohlocket, in the Christmas oratorio. 2. Aria Fromme Musen, to the aria Frohe Hirten eilt, in the oratorio. 3. The aria Kron und Preis gekrönter Damen, to the aria Großer Herr und starker König, in the oratorio. And from the chorus Blicket ihr Linden, to the chorus Herrscher des Himmels, in the oratorio. End of footnote. In the autumn of the same year, the king and queen visited Leipzig. Bach hurriedly wrote the cantata Preise dein Glücke, gesegnetes Sachsen, which was performed in the marketplace before the windows of the royal pair on the evening of 5th October. Quote, "About 9 o'clock in the evening," says Solomon Riemer's chronicle, "the whole of the students here performed before their majesties a most submissive serenade with trumpets and kettle drums, composed by Herr Kapellmeister Johann Sebastian Bach, Cantor zu St. Thomas. During it 600 students carried great torches, and 4 counts as marshals produced the music." End quote. In the recitatives, allusions are made to contemporary events. One of these speaks of the exploits of the French in the War of the Polish Succession. Quote, "In einer Zeit, da alles uns blitzt und kracht, ja der Franzosen Macht, die doch so vielmal schon gedämpft worden, von Süden und von Norden auch unserem Vaterland mit Schwert und Feuer droht, kann diese Stadt so glücklich sein, dich, mächtigen Schutzgott unserer Linden, in ihrem Schoß zu finden." End quote. The texts of the sacred cantatas of that time also give expression to the anxiety caused by the war. The music of this coronation cantata is somewhat unequal in quality. A number of the movements seem to be borrowed from other works. Only one number was taken from it for the Christmas oratorio. Note: the adaptation is again barbarous. The aria, quote, "durch die von Eifer entflammten Waffen," by the weapons inflamed with anger, end quote, is provided with the sacred text, quote, "Erleucht auch meine finstern Sinne, lighten my darkened sense," end quote. The text of the secular cantata is not by Picander, nor does it appear to be by Bach. End of note. The first chorus afterwards became the Hosanna of the B minor Mass. 2 days later, on the 7th of October, the king's birthday was celebrated. For this festival, Bach had long prepared a performance of the cantata Schleicht spielende Wellen at the Collegium Musicum. The text is by Picander, who again did Bach the service of supplying him with a poem exceedingly rich in musical motifs. He manages this by making the Vistula, the Elbe, the Danube, and the Pleiße laud the good fortune of the Saxon Poland through which they flow. This is all Bach needs. He lets the words of the text go where they will, and in almost every number depicts the changeful play of the waves. In the first chorus, their multiform motion is represented by the cooperation of 3 motifs. The truth of the picture to nature is astounding. All the irregularity and unexpectedness within a monotonous rhythm that gives such fascination to the song of the waves is here achieved in tone. The text runs thus, quote, "Schleicht spielende Wellen und murmelt gelinde, nein, rauschet geschwinde. Glide along, ye waves, in play, and murmur gently. No, rush along swiftly." End quote. As a great deal depends on the playing here, Bach has liberally sprinkled the original parts with dots, ties, and dynamic marks. They show us, down to the smallest detail, how he wished his music to be performed. In the aria of the Elbe, quote, "Jede Woge meiner Wellen ruft das goldene Wort August." Every one of my billows calls out the golden word Augustus. End quote. The appropriate motion is rendered by a solo violin. In the aria of the Danube, the motion of the waves is represented in a very complex style. The motif of the aria of the Pleiße runs thus. In the final chorus, the motion is throughout tranquil and majestic. Thus, in 13 months, from September 1733 to October 1734, Bach had produced 5 cantatas in honor of the royal house. He could hardly have shown more loyalty; nevertheless, he had still to wait 2 years for the title he so eagerly desired. After this, the secular compositions became less and less frequent. The cantata Thomanna saß noch betrübt, performed on 21st November 1734 on the occasion of the induction of the younger Ernesti, is now lost. The dreary text is preserved in Riemer's Chronicle. 4 years later, 1738, another cantata of homage to the royal house was performed. Riemer's Chronicle speaks of it thus, quote, "On the morning of the 28th April, about 9 o'clock, Baron Woldemar von Schmettau gave a solemn discourse in St. Paul's Church on the approaching marriage of the Princess Amelia and His Majesty the King of the Two Sicilies. At 9 o'clock in the evening, the university students, with many torches, performed a fine Nachtmusik with trumpets and kettledrums before Appel's house in the market, a submissive drama composed by Herr Kapellmeister Johann Sebastian Bach, whereupon Count von Zieroten, Baron von Schmettau, Herr von Leibnitz, and Herr von Marschall were so gracious as to submit the cantata most humbly to the kings and the princesses, and were allowed to kiss hands." End quote. We are not told whether this honor fell to the composer also. Magister Birnbaum mentions this cantata in his defense of Bach against Scheibe, 1739, adding it as a proof that the quote, Herr Court composer writes movingly, expressively, naturally, symmetrically, and in accordance not with the depraved, but with the best taste. End quote. The music is lost. The text glorifies August II and his father under the names of Solomon and David. The title of the cantata is Willkommen, ihr herrschenden Götter der Erden. Altogether, we have only 3 secular cantatas dating from Bach's last creative period. The first, Angenehmes Wiederau, belongs to the year 1737. On 28th September of that year, Johann Christian Hennecke, a quondam lackey who had prospered by the favor of Count Brühl, rendered homage at Wiederau on entering into possession of his land. Picander, who wished to curry favor with the parvenu, had written a text and asked Bach to compose the music. The opening chorus of the cantata, it is repeated at the end, is one of the most spirited movements ever written by Bach. We can easily understand him using it again for a festival work. It recurs in the cantata for Midsummer Day, Freue dich, erlöste Schar, No. 30. 4 of the arias are also incorporated in the sacred work. The adaptation of the second is very imperfect, as will be seen from a cursory comparison of the 2 texts. Quote, Angenehmes Wiederau, aria. Was die Seele kann ergötzen, was vergnügt und hoch zu schätzen, soll dir lehn und erblich sein. Meine Fülle soll nichts sparen und dir reichlich offenbaren, dass mein ganzer Vorrat dein. End quote. From Freue dich, erlöste Schar, quote, aria. Kommt, ihr angefochtenen Sünder, eilt und lauft, ihr Adamskinder, euer Heiland ruft und schreit, kommet, ihr verirrten Schafe, steht auf vom Sündenschlafe, dann jetzt ist die Gnadenzeit. End quote. The cantata Meran an Neue Oberkeit was also written for an act of homage on entering into possession of land. It was performed on 30th August 1742, when the Chamberlain Karl Heinrich von Dieskau became Herr von Kleinschocker. The idea seems again to have come from Picander. As von Dieskau was his superior in the custom house, he had good reasons for paying him attention. Perhaps, too, the gentleman was one of Bach's Dresden patrons. At any rate, we find Frau von Dieskau in 1752 mentioned as godmother to the firstborn son of Wilhelm Friedemann. The idea of writing a piece of rustic music did not come inopportunely to Bach, for he had a strong penchant to burlesque. Almost all the movements are set in the form of dance tunes. The overture is a potpourri of dances, terminating with a waltz. The action is simply this: the village people come to congratulate the lord of the manor and offer him good wishes, after which they retire to drink free beer in the tavern. The text is skillfully put together by Picander. He gives Bach the opportunity to contrast the music of the town and that of the village. The composer also employs folk melodies. One of these, had lately become popular with the words "Frisch auf zum fröhlichen Jagen." The other, seems to have been well known as a cradle song. A third is used in the form of interludes in a recitative. It is the same tune as appears in the Goldberg variations. There may be other folk melodies in the cantata, though we cannot be sure of them. The orchestra usually consists of a contrabass, a viola, and a violin. In the song "Es nehme 10.000 Dukaten," a horn is added. The aria "Klein Schocher müsse so zart und süße" is instrumented in the town style, that is, with flute and strings. Only Bach's fatal passion for borrowing can account for the fact that the number "Dein Wachstum sei feste und lache vor Lust" is not set to original music, but to the prized song of Pan, "Zum Tanze, zum Sprunge," or was he so pleased with this that he wanted to hear it again? The cantata O Holder Tag was written as table music for a wedding feast. If the text can be trusted, the wedded pair were musical. The question is discussed whether music ought to have any place in such a feast. At the end, the answer is given in the affirmative, especially as a patron of the art is here concerned. The spouses each received a copy of the parts, written with extra neatness and fastened with silk. These are now in the Royal Library at Berlin. This cantata probably belongs to Bach's last creative period. It is a specimen of that art of charm on which he prides himself in Phoebus and Pan. Charmingly roguish is the aria, "Schweigt, ihr Flöten, be silent, you flutes," in which the frightened flute cannot achieve a complete theme, but merely gives out short fragments, after each of which it stops timidly. Soon after this first performance, Bach provided the cantata with a new text, O angenehme Melodie, which sings the praise of art in general. In this adaptation it was given at the house of Bach's Dresden patron, Count Fleming, and probably at a meeting of the Collegium Musicum, apparently at the one in 1749, at which Phoebus and Pan was revived. The new version of the occasional cantata seems to refer to the Biedermann controversy. One recitative runs thus, "Wie wohl, beliebte Musiker, so angenehm dein Spiel so vielen Ohren ist, so bist du doch betrübt und stehst in Gedanken da, denn es sind ihr viele, denen du verächtlich bist. Mich deucht, ich höre deine Klagen selbst also sagen, schweigt, ihr Flöten, schweigt, ihr Töne." The final section of the opening recitative, "Die Wissenschaften anderer Künste sind irdnen Witzes klüge Dünste. Du aber, die Musik, bist allein vom Himmel zu uns abgestiegen, so musst du auch recht himmlisch sein," is in the pure Bachian spirit. Two Italian cantatas have come down to us, Amore Traditore and Non sace sia dolore. The first is set for bass and clavier accompaniment, a unique case with Bach. In the second, for soprano solo, the accompaniment is for strings and flute. A splendid sinfonia opens the cantata. Neither work, as we might expect from Bach, makes any attempt at imitating the Italian style. The texts are written in Germanized Italian. The second, judging from an allusion here and there, is meant to console an Italian artist who is leaving Germany and returning to his native land. The fact that the secular cantatas are mostly only occasional works written to order is apt to prevent our doing them full justice. We are inclined to believe that with such an origin they must necessarily have been written hastily and mechanically, and so belong to a lower class of art. Bach and his generation, however, thought differently. When he had time, he wrote the works with particular pleasure and took great pains with the performance, as is evident from the careful way in which the parts have been revised, and the large number of phrasing marks and dynamic signs that they contain. It is consequently time to clear away a misconception and to make the Bach of charm known to the musical world. The majority of these works were published nearly a generation ago, yet only one or two of them have been given on rare occasions here and there. Works like Phoebus und Pan, Die Wahl des Herkules, Der zufriedengestellte Aeolus, Weichet nur betrübter Schatten, Schleicht, spielende Wellen, and O angenehme Melodie should appear regularly on our concert programs. Even the coffee cantata and the Mehr han ein neuer Oberkeit should be brought forward for other reasons than as mere curiosities. It is curious that the experience of those who have produced the cantatas does not lead to further emulation. It has always been observed that the audience feels no sense of strangeness whatever, but is warmly enthusiastic. The Bach Society of Paris has had the courage to give some of the secular cantatas, including Weichet nur betrübter Schatten, the Coffee Cantata, and Mehr han ein neuer Oberkeit, at its very first concerts, and owes its remarkable success in no small degree to this course. The question of the texts presents no particular difficulty. Certain fundamental alterations are necessary, as August II and his family, and Herr Korte, Herr Müller, and all the other lights of science are of minor interest to us now. Their names must be taken out of the poems. The proper method of adaptation is indicated for us in the music. The main thing is to see that the words embody the nature poetry that have inspired the music. In Der zufriedengestellte Aeolus, only a few recitatives and the final chorus need altering. In other works, the changes will have to be more drastic. When shall we find the poet who will supply the music of Schleicht, spielende Wellen with that poetic song of the waves that Bach dimly perceived when he wrote the work? To the objection, have we the right to undertake such adaptations of the text? We may reply that Bach himself gives it us. He converted the wedding cantata, O holder Tag, into the hymn to music, O angenehme Melodie. The fate of the recitatives need not concern us. Bach himself, when making his adaptations, abandons them without scruple when he has no need for them. Our singers, for their part, should pitilessly worry the conductors, great and small, until they're given the opportunity to sing the splendid music that Bach has provided for them in these works. The sopranos especially should plead for the solo cantatas, O angenehme Melodie, and Weichet nur betrübter Schatten. End of chapter 30, part 2. Read by Sandra in Muskoka, 2022.